on YouTube. Again, you will not be seen. So welcome to everyone to Soul Cafe. And our topic today is the anatomy of change. It might sound more fancier than we think it is, but I guess we'll see. But as usual, we will start with a little reflection. Just checking in with myself. Going inside. Do I know what that means? It's about bringing my awareness on how I'm thinking, how I'm feeling. Checking in about my inner status. But there is a purpose to checking in with how I'm thinking and feeling. That is my inner status. The purpose is actually about first being aware of what is my priority in life. Something that is easily forgotten in our day-to-day situations. And we usually don't notice it, that we've forgotten, until there's a feeling that things are pointless. There's frustration, irritation. There's restlessness, feeling listless. So what is my priority in life? Underneath even the events I'm trying to accomplish, finalize projects, what is my purpose in life? And am I honoring it? Or do I even know how to honor it? Some may not know what it is they're looking for. Some do, but they also don't know what to do to honor it. With more than 8 billion beings on this planet, underneath all of the things everyone wants, it all comes down to wanting peace and happiness. And then this is why checking in. How am I feeling? What are my thoughts like? What is my inner world like? What does my inner world have to do with my purpose in life? question I can continue to ask myself again and again, not just once a week, but throughout the day. Om Shanti. And so today's topic actually is really touching on the essence of what Raja Yoga is really about, is this aspect of change. So it's always nice to use a physical example, and this may be a stretch in terms of looking at it on a spiritual level, but there is some overlap for sure. So when it comes to moving, and I think that everyone, if not maybe not all, but most have had to move from one place to another. So what does that look like? That's I would say a change in life. What does that look like? And so I asked that question because when it comes to change, sometimes we have some really huge expectations, unrealistic expectations, non-sustainable expectations of how change works. And this aspect of moving is often used as a really good example. So what often happens when it comes to change is that many do struggle with it, or they say, I'm comfortable with change, I have no problem with it, but they don't realize when things change in a way that's comfortable, that there are still some subtle forms of expectations of how things are going to be like when change happens. I'm certain many have already known about this, about trying to make these New Year's resolutions. Many struggle to be able to keep these resolutions for themselves. So what's going on underneath? And so I don't have an image in hand right now, but I can try to see if I can find it. But it's this picture of the iceberg. And perhaps maybe you can imagine what I'm talking about. Let's see if we can bring that up here. And let's see here, it's not the greatest way of sharing. Here you go. So this is what a nice, I guess you can say metaphor in terms of just our ideas of change is we want change, but there's a lot that kind of has to happen, on a invisible level, an incognito level, stuff that has to happen underneath for change to happen. And that has a lot to do with resolutions, making change. And we're using the example of moving. And there's a lot of things that are invisible when it comes to moving. So we'll visit this image in a second again. But back to this whole aspect of moving. Why we like to use this example is because when you're moving, usually you're not going to get rid of where you're living and you're going to be living in the streets. Ideally, that's not the situation, but you would, whether you're buying a new home, building a new home, you're still living in your old place, but there is a transition that needs to happen. And so when it comes to, and there's a lot of stuff that happens at transition, as you saw in the picture of the iceberg, that happens on a very underground level. There's lots of decision making, planning, lots of weighing pros and cons, lots of signing papers, looking for places. There's a lot of just preparing boxes, moving. There's so much that happens, in terms of moving, that it doesn't seem like it's apparent, especially when you are a child of the parent. And I was like, oh yeah, my mom and dad will do everything for me. It's like we don't think about these things, of course, when we're children, if somebody else has to do all that work. Now that's a very, very, I guess you can say, superficial example, but in terms of the transition is what we're talking about, is that for it to be sustainable, you are still taking care of food, drink, shelter, all these, you still have to work, you have all these responsibilities, there has to be a transition, the place is going to be built, boxes are being packed, and sometimes things are being moved slowly, slowly, slowly. The house has to be cleaned here, the new place has to be cleaned. So lots of preparation that has to happen. Now, again, I mentioned it's sort of like a loose example, but in terms of the transition is what the purpose of why I'm using it as an example is that there needs to be, yes, so Pauline has mentioned, letting go of unnecessary stuff. Absolutely. And I welcome you. If you can think of anything else when it comes to that transition, preparation needs to happen. And so we use that example. But if you can think of when it comes to change, when we're just using physical examples of change, what is needed for change? If you can just think of any physical examples out there, and then we'll definitely go into the spiritual when it comes to change. And there's one very specific thing that Raja Yoga really focuses on, which is the purpose of this session. When it comes to change, any thoughts at all? So this is a really good point in terms of letting go of unnecessary stuff. And for those of you who are actually here in Calgary or heard about in the news about the floods in 2013, that was a huge change for many because many, their basements were flooded actually. So all that invisible stuff actually came up into the surface, and it became a chance for many to really, actually many were forced to let go of these things because many of these things were damaged, but also it's like, is this stuff of any use? So when you even move, there's also an assessing to see what needs to stay, what needs to go, what do I need to prepare for in terms of this transition. And what's really lovely about this example of moving is because one of these capacities we often talk about in this study of me, the spiritual being, is actually being able to bring things, pack things up. You've got stuff all over the place. You've got to pack things up and to be able to do something and carry on with it or leave it behind. And so when it comes to that piece too, when it comes to changing, I need to be able to adapt and move along accordingly as situations constantly change. So when we're going to go back on a spiritual level and take a look at this image again. So this image of the iceberg. And it's quite interesting because I do, so sorry about that. I do work with individuals. That is trying to help someone come into the room. Okay, so I do work with individuals who do focus a lot on this aspect of change. And one of the things about change is change in behavior, change in attitude, and also change in terms of the cognition, changing the way I think so that I can change the way that my attitude is like and change my behavior. However, the issue is that there's something much more deeper than just the way I'm thinking. And ultimately, what it is about my awareness and my consciousness. And so to be able to really understand how change works, and for there to be successful change, I need to actually know about the anatomy of me, the being. And that's the tricky part, is that we actually don't know enough about how we operate to really understand what is successful change. And so in terms of this aspect of Raj Yoga, we do study in the study about me as a being of consciousness. And what is important is that there is capacities of the body. So there's the heart, there's the liver, lungs, stomach, different functions of the different organs of the body. But then there's me, consciousness itself. And how do I actually function? Because that really affects what my understanding of change is. And so in terms of me, the soul, how I function is actually, a lot of it is just quite underground. So if you're looking at this picture here, so when it comes to what does it mean to be a spiritual being, is that I am consciousness. And welcome back, Pauline. And so we were just talking about right now that it's about consciousness. It's about me. And we're really wanting to understand how I, the being, function. And we never really think about that. We're really focused. Some are really focused on their thoughts. Yes, I need to change the way I'm thinking. Many know that their mind is out of control. They don't want to think negative thoughts. They don't want to have a certain attitude about certain things. But the issue is that many don't feel that they're able to change. So what's going on? So when we're looking at this picture of the iceberg, when it comes to the understanding of me, the being, me, consciousness, we have three capacities, whether individuals are aware that they are consciousness or not. You can say soul, you can say being, but you can say consciousness, but we are consciousness itself. And as consciousness, we have three capacities. And the most accessible capacity that everyone is aware of is the capacity to think. Is that we don't realize that we have more than 20,000 thoughts a day, but we're aware of a very small fraction of them. And a lot of times these thoughts are sort of running in the back of our mind, in our awareness, and we don't realize it's actually sort of based on habit, and we're operating in that way. And I remember seeing that happen within myself today, just a certain way of operating, and not even seeing it. But when you see it, it is very, very illuminating when you can see certain ways in how you are operating. So that's the mind. We have a capacity to think. The mind belongs to me, consciousness, not to the brain. The brain can only function with me. All these electrons firing and all of these thoughts that fire through the nervous system, through the brain, it's because of me, the living being. Without me, nothing in this body would be able to function. Then there's a second capacity that we have, and this capacity is the ability to discern what is right and wrong, what feels, what makes sense, the capacity to remember. And this capacity, again, its ability has changed through time when we have become more and more disconnected from our real sense of self. Because right now, a lot, if not everything that we are remembering and recalling and trying to make meaning and sense of, is very physical things. And so this capacity, we're using it all the time, but we're kind of using it on very, very, just physical things, temporary things. Even the roles we play the relationships are temporary as well. We know that they come and go. And finally, now as you can see from this picture of the iceberg, the deeper we go down inside into the waters, the more subtle these things. And so just give me 1 second here. So when it comes to the more subtle things, the intellect is quite subtle, right? The mind, it's really easy for us to be able to know that when there are thoughts coming up in the mind. But when it comes to this aspect of the third capacity we have, which is actually sanskars, we can loosely say it's personality, we can say it's these deep habits, but it's not very apparent. The only way we know how these deep habits work is the way it actually comes up in terms of our way of thinking. And that's why many feel right now, it's like, it's just natural the way that I'm thinking, the way that I have these negative attitudes. It's just the way that I am like. And they find it's just, there's no way that I can change that about myself. And so when it comes to change, actually, we need all these three capacities. But when we don't know who we are, we're actually focusing a lot on the mind. And this is what Raj Yoga is about, is actually to go deeper. It's actually much more than just changing my thinking. So I know right now there's a lot in terms of nowadays focusing so much on cognition to try to change attitudes, to try to therefore change behavior. However, it's much deeper than that. What really needs to happen actually has to be at the level of these deep habits, which is deep in the subconscious. And what Raja Yoga is about is being able to make that change, but in a very non-violent way. And so every being in this world, and as you can see the way the world events are happening for many decades now, this cry for peace is just increasingly getting louder and louder and louder. Of course, we have some questionable ways in which we try to find peace, but everyone, that is what they're looking for. Everyone is looking for peace and happiness. And so when it comes to this aspect then, everyone is looking for that. Everyone remembers that feeling. They don't know exactly much more deeper in terms of looking for that. But in this study, you're really understanding yourself to be a spiritual being, that your nature is actually of peace. Your true nature is actually of happiness. And one way that we kind of know that is because we don't go through the day wanting to be sad, wanting to be heavy. We're not comfortable when we go into those states. There might come a time when someone has completely given up and they're always feeling that that's in that state, and then they've just decided for themselves, this must just be who I am, right? That's become further and further away from who we are. But so there is this memory. So in this study of Raja Yoga, it's really honing in on that memory, using the intellect. So this is the second capacity. There are certain things that I remember and recognize. When the timing is right for me, I remember and recognize and I resonate with. When there comes a time when the temporary things just don't feed you, don't fulfill you anymore, that's when you become very receptive to looking for what does resonate with you. So this is the aspect of the intellect, the second capacity, which is a huge part in terms of real change that needs to happen. And in this study, experiencing myself to be a soul. Sorry, I am missing these. Okay, thank you, Pauline. Most have fears of change and newness in life, and absolutely. And one of the things that we don't realize is because our nature has changed. Our nature has changed from this place of pure goodness to now we're completely run by these capacities inside that completely trap us, like ego, and really fixed on the way certain things are to be. This is attachment. And our greatest attachment is to this body, as well as the image and the ideas that come with identifying with physicality. And those things are really hard to change. And of course then, as you mentioned, Pauline, that there are definitely then fears of change and newness because of not being able to know what else there is. When we kind of get stuck in certain ideas, we can't see other options. We can't see how things could be any different. And so in this study, the more I actually practice experiencing the original eternal sense of me, the more I actually shift these deep habits. Because right now, these deep habits are based on what we call the five vices, which is ego, desire, attachment, anger, and greed. We come to a point in our lives now where we accept that that's the way that we normally are like, but it isn't. And we are not here to convince everyone that that's the case. It's more that you start to feel that when the timing feels right. And I certainly remember that time as well, is that operating that way becomes extremely tiring, and you can actually come to a point where you become tired of actually operating that way, of feeling that way. And so it's really about then in the study learning the anatomy of me, the soul, not just to be intellectual, so that I can actually have the power of understanding of what I need to do. Now, for the meditation commentary we had earlier, that's why the question about what is the purpose in my life? And sometimes we kind of have to back up the bus more and more and more because we think it's about the situation, we think it's about this certain person, but it's actually something deeper, something deeper, something deeper. And so it's really about, in this study, learning about myself. And then actually the other piece which makes Raja Yoga very unique is I need to actually have a completely different experience of who I am. Because right now my experience of my sense of self is actually the cause of the peacelessness that I am feeling. And when we were mentioning in the commentary that we do seem to lose our sense of purpose in the day. And knowing my sense of purpose is very much connected as well to be able to understand what's going to fill me. If I don't realize that what's filling me on a sustainable level really can't be anything temporary, if I don't realize that, then certainly what I believe is my purpose in life can only go so far. There will be a point in time when you either reach that or you come to a point where it's like, is that really going to really fulfill what I'm really looking for? Is this really, really what my purpose in life is about? And so often many actually go through crises in their life to get to that point. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, because sometimes it takes a lot for one to really realize that one needs to really check in inside of what really matters. So this experience of the original eternal me, not the roles, not the image, not what we identify through others, through possessions, so many things around us that we identify with as being me. But underneath all of that, this real sense of who I am. So that's one piece, is awareness of the real me, but experiencing what that real sense of who I am is. That has nothing to do with anything temporary. And the more I can experience that, there's a sense of me, this real personality of me, that has nothing to do with anything around me. I will feel less and less affected by things around me. The second aspect in terms of change is that we've lost power. We've forgotten who we are. We've lost power. So we just can't just do this alone. Experiencing who I am resonates with me when the timing is right. But this is where the Supreme Soul's function is. So this is a being who's always aware. He's a spiritual being, the only being who doesn't forget who he is, who doesn't come into the body like the rest of us. And for some religions, they call this being God. So many different names in different religions, but everyone does remember this being. And of course, there are many who say there's no way I would remember that being. But when things come to a point in your life where there is no one who can help you, nothing can help you, you will remember that being some way. It is fixed within us, this program. The reason why is because when I say program, it's this belonging piece that when we are aware of ourselves as physical beings, humans, we have parents, biological parents. Some may not know theirs, and some do. But when it comes to a spiritual being who is now waking up to being a spiritual being in the midst of the physical, you also increasingly be aware then I have physical parents, but I also have spiritual parents. We often call that being God. And this being's role is one who is constantly in that state of being real. Always in that state that's full of what I used to be like. And the study is about connecting to that experience of being, of belonging to that one. And really helps to change myself back because his vibration is constantly pure, always real, always true. And we know what it's like when we're around certain company. You know, when you're around somebody who's sad, it can sort of bring you down. When you're around, just even a noisy environment, it really affects us. But this is a being who's constantly gentle, non-intrusive, always full. Being in the company of that being really helps again to emerge my original personality, my true nature. So before we're just going to take a quick pause, and if there's any questions, Pauline, I think you're the only one that's here. I'll just take a peek on YouTube as well. But if you have any questions or thoughts to share. Oh, 1 second here. Go ahead.
Shanti. I think based on my experience, I mentioned to you that one of my purpose why I came to the study is, I feel like that life, I can't find it, it becomes like routinary and robotic my life is. And, the more I sick and the more I feel empty when it's that. So you mentioned, once you have the knowledge and the awareness of yourself, of who you truly are, and there's two questions, that I learned that most of us are familiar with is who am I and who I belong to. You gain that, relationship with yourself and special relationship with God. Relationship with God is a big piece for me because a lot of times, before, I got into the study, I asked God why, and I become a beggar. I beg, please, please, please. There's no, knowledge of the role, the experience of God. It's more intellectual from my old belief system. Right now, I gradually experience, the real, feeling and awareness of this, and his role in my life, and experiencing the spiritual parent, a parent that is not, no matter you made a mistake or something, he's always there. So he's very accepting, and no matter, many, many times, and you mentioned about the power, and or I really didn't think about that power, that power from God, but through my mini experiments, it just comes naturally, and it's such quite of a fulfilling achievement, and you feel that sense of contentment and happiness and guilt. So I think that's a wonderful experience. About awareness of yourself, and big piece for me is my relationship with the divine, which gives me power, to help me remember and purify me, in this journey of life. So
Thank you, Pauline. Yeah,
yeah, and sorry, also self-respect,
yes.
my self-respect, because it's something that really prevent me from moving forward. So each day I experience tiny bit, that self-respect and self-respect for others. So I have this elevated feelings for myself, and automatically it just radiates, in my workplace, which is quite of a challenging, situations at time, but I've never lost, faith, in me and in God. So
Mm-hmm. I feel that you've captured a lot of different aspects which are very important when it comes to change. This one piece, you talk about self-respect, self-worth, that's a huge, huge one. And like these are definitely subtle things that I think a part of when you mentioned about fear, it's actually something that many actually don't feel comfortable addressing. And in terms of self-respect, self-worth, and probably because we don't know how to address it. If you don't know who you really are, and you actually don't have the capacity of how to address it, not a sense of overarching understanding about yourself and your true, or, your eternal story, it's really difficult to want to face certain things inside. Because sometimes many say, I don't want to have to address these things and face these things. And in a sense, some clarification is required, because the facing that we're talking about, this isn't like about facing the ugliness and girding and battling and stuff like that. And even when it comes to this aspect of power, to be able to see things inside, it actually is all very, very gentle, very calm. Like this capacity of having power to be able to change inside is actually very gentle, very non-violent, and actually there's an ease in it when I actually start to gain power. So spiritual power is very, very different from physical power. And so, as you had also mentioned about when it comes to that, that relationship and connection with God, when you are sharing, it was making me realize that ultimately what is happening is that my vibration, the very core of me, the soul, is changing back to the original vibration of who I am. The more I experience who I am, the more I can actually just be colored by that company of my spiritual parent, who's always in that neutral, loving, full, non-intrusive state. It's as if I just return back to myself again. Just like when you go in front of a fireplace, you get warm when you're in front of that fire. And so we're colored by that. You can call it that vibration of the fireplace. But this is something much deeper. It's spiritual, is that there is an original vibration of who I am. And a part of that too is it's about, my consciousness has to change. But the thing is that, as I shared earlier, it's not just about changing the way I think, because there are very deep set beliefs that I have about myself. And one of them is some real deep issues of self-respect and self-worth. And we really need the experience now that changes us. Everyone in this world is looking for that feeling of calm, feeling of understanding, feeling of belonging, feeling of love. Love is probably the biggest one, and peace as well. Souls are looking for that experience because the experience itself, is much more powerful than anything. That's what we remember at the end of the day when it comes to anything in our life, is about the experience. And so it's powerful because in this study of Raja Yoga, it's about the experience and the knowledge to give context to what I'm experiencing. And why that's important is because ultimately my consciousness has to change. In the middle of action and interaction, I need to actually have a different sense of myself, a different awareness of myself. And that is where change really actually happens, is when there is that shift in consciousness. And this is why then when we're talking about New Year's resolutions, now we can understand why it's not actually going to be able to be sustainable. I don't mean that in terms of sharing bad news. It's not even about being realistic. It's actually about being hopeful of how change really actually happens. Is that we talk about we have to change our attitudes about things, but even deeper than that, it's my sense of identity. So this aspect I know that Pauline has mentioned about in terms of who am I and who I belong to, the hugest things. We don't realize how much we have, very temporary, limited ideas about ourselves as we walk through the day. Huge. Lately I've been trying to grow plants in the house, and I'm sure because I'm not having very good luck with growing a basil plant. And I don't know how many times I've been my fifth attempt, okay? So now it's just like, I just keep saying, I'm just bad at growing plants, And I'm sure in my mind and in my intellect, so I can discern, like, that's not a very good attitude to have. And the more I keep saying it out loud and inside, I'm actually fortifying a certain perception. I know this is a very superficial example, but we start to realize what is happening is when we start to have certain thoughts about ourselves, it creates a certain kind of awareness, meaning it's a certain impression that keeps coming up. And the more you keep that impression going, the more it then becomes a deep-seated attitude, right? And we know we all have that. When it comes to dancing, when it comes to art, you hear many say, nope, can't do it. I don't know how to dance. So I don't know how to draw. And it's like a wall has already been created. We have sentenced ourselves. This is where it is. Yes, attitude's important, but thoughts themselves will not change it, right? Awareness itself will, but we need to have a real experience of myself. And this is where our spiritual parent, Supreme Soul's function is very essential, because this is a being who can see you and experience you for the real you, which no one else in this world can. And when you have that experience of yourself, it's a complete game changer. And this study is all about being able to constantly learn how to emerge those experiences with understanding, which bolsters my realization and acceptance and recognition of who I am. And so that change happens. And so that you'll start to notice your responses change in similar situations you've had in the past. But the thing is that it is my consciousness as I walk and move around that has to change. So these two big questions that Paulina mentioned about who am I and who do I belong to? And we'll throw another question into that mix as well, is that who was I and who am I to become? And this is that aspect of not being able to see my greater story of who I really am, and how much being able to have a broader perspective of who I am really, really helps to free me. And it's not at the level of intellectual, it's at the level of something that really resonates in the heart. And every being in this world actually is feeling quite trapped, whether in their roles, their images. I say images because we all have different perceptions of ourselves, and everyone has different perceptions of us, expectations we have of ourselves and others have of us. So the things that suppress us is huge. A realization too that we actually have a choice in life. Absolutely. However, the feeling of choice doesn't feel like you have a choice until you have some power. I think that that's, yes, yeah. That's where truth is really, really important. And when something that you realize, of who you are, and it goes deep, and it's not like you're trying for it to go deep, something that just sits in there, something that strikes you, stays with you. Sometimes it just takes time for that to grow, and like something deep has been planted. And that is the power of truth. Something that is who you are, and everyone is looking for that. But ultimately, I know we've had so many of these conversations during the interviews of timing. Timing is probably the biggest thing. Yes, it has to be your time as well. But as you're waiting patiently, when it's your time, it's not like there aren't certain things that we can really do to optimize that journey inside. These honest questions we have, some reflections that we have within ourselves, but there are certain things that continue to cultivate that. And for anyone who's pulled at all, even a little bit, to that they want to go deeper inside, the timing is there. It's just that it might not look like the way we hope it to look like. So just checking if any final thoughts, even on YouTube as well, or if you have any final thoughts at all, Pauline. Sounds like you're good. Sounds good. All right. So we'll have a little reflection. So just a warm reminder, we do have a Raja Yoga workshop next Sunday, not tomorrow. So next Sunday, I believe that's November the 28th. And so it is at 5 o'clock to 6:15. The link for registration is on the website. It's also on Eventbrite, and it's about remembering the true self, or remembering the inner self. But so it's again very essenceful workshop, but about this aspect of my sense of identity, and what do I need to do to be able to access that. Ultimately, as what today's session is about, is that that I'm learning to shift, and for that shift to actually be sustainable. So we'll just end with a little reflection. When I realize who I truly am, is not physical. And that's why so many, they even have that phrase they use, I just want some time to get away, to be. Many want to have that experience just to be. And many know that that experience to be is not a physical one, nothing you can visibly see. It's at that level of experience. It reveals, in fact, who I really am. That I am a being who cannot be seen. But what feeds me, even without me knowing, is the experience of quality, experience of peace, meaningfulness, depth, This is what spirituality is about. The study of that which cannot be seen, but can be felt. That I am a spiritual being. What feeds me are these experiences. That no matter what one is looking for in life, it is always for that feeling, eventually, of peace and of happiness. That I am the being on the inside. And that what I truly want in life, in the midst of the roles, the to-do list, the midst of projects, deadlines, opinions of others. What matters is that feeling of complete resolve, that everything is okay. That feeling of being stable and not affected. Again, these are all experiences, nothing you can see. So in the face of all the inner resistance to try to get things done, keep up the image, underneath all of that, still, these experiences of being are what matter most. They always have. And these experiences, just to be in that state of calm, a state of being light, nothing that you need to pay for, but the experiences that truly, truly fill you, fill the heart. Change becomes very natural when I am at peace, when I am content, because I am full. I don't need to control anything out there. Uncertainty wouldn't be something that I would feel when I am full. Om Shanti. Well, thank you for
Om
joining.
Shanti. And thank you